Okay.
Okay, it says that we are recording now, so I guess we should go ahead and get started.
Excellent.
Hello, my name is Mark Anderson with the Chattanooga Writers Guild, and this is our monthly program for April 2020, and it is National Poetry Month. And tonight, our speaker is former president of Chattanooga Writers Guild and longtime friend of the Guild, John C. Mannone. And his poems has poems appearing and accepted in the 2020 Antarctic Poetry Exhibition, North Dakota Quarterly, The Mentor, Blue Fifth Review, Poetry South, Baltimore Review, and others. His poetry won the Impressions of Appalachia Creative Arts Contest 2020. He was awarded a Jean Ritchie Fellowship 2017 in Appalachian Literature and served as celebrity judge for the National Federation of State Poetry Societies 2018. His latest three collections, Flex Lines, The Intersection of Science, Love and Poetry, is forthcoming in Linnet's Wings Press 2020. He edits poetry for Abyss and Apex and other journals. A retired physics professor, he lives near Knoxville, Tennessee. And we can find more about him at his blog, jcmannone.wordpress.com. His name is spelled Mannone, J.C. Mannone. Welcome, John. It's good to try. This is our first experiment with the current state of affairs. We're doing a Zoom interview, and we're just hoping for the best reception we can. Welcome, and let's. How should we get started tonight? How are you feeling tonight?
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here, and happy Easter to you and everyone who's listening.
Yeah, here we go. Well, I know you're well respected in the Writers Guild as almost the poet laureate of the guild, and so I think we're going to learn something tonight. But I want to start out by asking you why you love poetry, how you chose poetry. I mean, you could have written in other things, but usually there's something that gets us going to where we actually love poetry. And then I want to ask you after that for some examples of why, let us taste some of the poetry that you would consider worth tasting.
Okay, that's a good question, Mark. I've thought about it and asked myself, why poetry? Why not some other creative outlet? Why even creative writing at all? Because I'm a left-brain type of guy. I'm a scientist. And I get joy out of reading equations, so to speak, as a chemist and a physicist. But something happened, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'll give you a little bit of a background on it. I was teaching an astronomy course for a local community college, and I wanted to make the experience for my students more than good. This would be probably the only science course that they would ever be taking. They're fulfilling their science requirement, and these were non-science majors. So I was looking for profound astronomical events that impacted history, or should I say astronomical events that had a profound impact on history. And when I learned about Paul Revere and his ride and the role of the moon, the late rising, nearly full moon, and the incoming tides, which is a lunisolar effect, definitely astronomy related. That was such an important impact that when I learned about this, it was through Longfellow's poem, Paul Revere's Ride. And so after the success of that venture, I naturally looked for more of Longfellow's works and saw that he wrote an awful lot about the night. And so I naturally became interested in poetry because of that. It could have just as well have been a piece of fiction, but it was a poem. And so that's how I think I stumbled on poetry as being something that became special to me. But then also on thinking deeper about it, where did this natural desire for poetry even begin? Because I think I did very poorly. Well, no, I know I did very poorly in poetry, and I guess it was my high school class, and I should actually hate it, but I don't. So I'm thinking that maybe my being Easter, this is so appropriate. My my discovery of my spiritual self, my coming to the Christ, had me in '97. I found myself looking at things very differently. My responses to people's birthdays or consolation notes because of a loss, all of a sudden became poetic. And I didn't want it to sound like a Hallmark card, but I did want it to sound authentic and very heartfelt. And so I think that maybe the genesis of poetry came from things like that. But then there's another thing that I learned when I was 65, some 6 years ago. I discovered after visiting my two sisters that my mother had written poetry in her recipe book. And when I discovered this, of course, I was elated that there's a genetic reason for my liking poetry. Sadly, however, I learned that her work must have been thrown out by mistake when she was moving from her apartment to my sister's apartment because she was not well. And this was a few years before she passed in 2002. So I think those reasons altogether are there's the genetic predisposition, there's a spiritual driver, and then there's the coincidental thing with Longfellow's work that set me towards poetry. That's why I like it, I think. All right, your next question.
That's nice to be able to pinpoint something like that and say, oh yeah, it was Longfellow that kind of introduced me or turned me on to that. So there's a lot of different kinds of poetry around this world. I've been reading some British, in my class, British poetry from the 16th through present, but mostly right now, 19th century. What do you like? What particular kind of poetry are you drawn to? I mean, is there?
Fortunately, I have a wide range of taste. And I can say that any well-crafted poem, and I know that's a subjective thing as well to an extent, I can like. In other words, I like formal poetry. I can like it as much as free verse or open verse, perhaps is a better word. But I can probably think of examples of what I don't like better than what I do like. I don't like language poetry. I think it's an oxymoron to call it poetry. But it was derived just to be oppositional, just to show that poetry is not this emotional thing. It's something that's rather sterile and contrived, and I don't buy any of that nonsense.
I want to interrupt you. Explain. I'm not sure what you mean by language poetry. What is that?
That it's actually spelled language, but in between each letter you'll see an equal sign. So it's a weird spelling. Again, that's probably a rebellion in spelling of the word itself, language. It's a postmodern construction, a postmodern idea, as opposed to contemporary. Postmodern as a period or movement of poetry. You had the modern poets, and these are the postmodern ones, which is under the contemporary, but not all contemporary poetry is language poetry. And I don't know much about it because I don't like it. It's like, I want to study the real thing instead of a counterfeit. So I don't know that much about it. But from what I've seen, it doesn't make much sense, and it's not supposed to make much sense. And that's exactly the opposite of what a poem is supposed to do. It's supposed to engage not only your intellect, but your heart, and probably your heart first, or your intellect second. Um, so,
Interesting point.
yeah. So anyway,
But there is something. I mean, there's a lot of art that affects our heart, but poetry seems to be one of those things that can also fascinate our mind because we're looking at intricacies or word patterns or the way things are said. I mean, what do you think about old school things like rhyme and meter?
excellent. Um, I there's got a lot of merit, and I admire the old masters who really had it down. And speaking of that influential person, Longfellow himself, even though I don't write in his style at all, he's been a great impact on me. He's the one who actually brought the culture of poetry to this country. It was already big in England, but not quite so big over here yet. But he was successful. In fact, his bust is the bust of Longfellow is over at what's it called, Winston Abbey, over in England, next to Tennyson. So anyway, um, I bring up Longfellow because he was a master of meter. I'll give you an example. Paul Revere's Ride. He wrote that poem in anapestic tetrameter. All right, so that's da-da-doom, that's an anapest. Da-da-doom, four of them, da-da-doom, 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 simulates the gallop of a horse. How appropriate for the poem to be able to take meter and have that extra literary depth, so to speak. Here, a sonic one that just really brings the poem even more alive. So Longfellow thought meter was extremely important. In fact, he studied his job. His job was mostly where he got money, was actually translating grammar books into Italian and into Spanish. And so he was a big linguist type of guy as well. So he traveled to various places in Europe. And I think it was Finland, and with their language, that gave him the cadence and rhythm for the Song of Hiawatha, at least from what he had written in letters to everybody. He would write to his father almost every day and to his friends as he was able. And half of his letters are actually, they exist, and they're stored in libraries. And so that's how I learned about Longfellow a lot. I researched him because he had such an impact on me. But anyway, to answer your question, yes, I do like rhyme, but it's often not done well. So I don't care for a lot of the rhyme that I read. It sounds forced. And so how do I get around it? How do I still like it? Because when I started writing in May of 2004, that's the only thing I knew was rhyming poetry. And so that's the way I would write until I learned about the free verse. And I got my fix, so to speak, by realizing that the rhymes can happen internally, not just on the ends of lines. And so that was liberating for me, because I could still get all that wonderful music that I desire, that I think is important, but the music can come in different ways. It doesn't have to come with end rhyme. So, but just to prove that I still can do end rhyme, I do it on occasion. And I don't mean to be silly, because it's easy to be silly, but to write a serious piece of work, how would I write a rhyming poem today? Because I do like rhyme. I would make the rhymes softer. They're called slant rhymes or half rhymes or some other word like that, where instead of it being a hard rhyme, like man and can would be hard rhymes, but men and can would be a soft rhyme, but just maybe the consonants would rhyme, or maybe the alliteratively rhyme, or there's some sonic in there that echoes the sound. And so that, combined with not having end stop lines, or not many of them, lets me feel okay about a rhyming poem. And one of the best compliments I ever got was at a critique group at CWG, as a matter of fact. Um, um, the old Christian Writers Market group is where it happened. Was the one listener said, after I told him it was one of my rare rhyming poems, he says, "I didn't know that was a rhyming poem." That's music to my ears. to be so soft-handed about the end rhyme that you don't notice it unless somebody points it out to you, or you notice it late in the game. So anyway.
Okay, thanks.
Hopefully that answers your question.
That's helpful. And it has been said that the form should serve the art rather than have the art serve the form. But why don't you give us an example of something that you would consider something you really enjoy? You have some examples of your own work there?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, I like to start off with sharing a little one, and I think I can do this with sharing too, so you'll be able to see it. I'm looking for the document. Don't panic.
Well, if you want, you can just read it to us. We'll just hear it.
No, what I can do is hit share, and you'll hear it and see it.
Okay.
Share screen, and I think this is the one. And if I just move it, then you'll all be able to see it.
It's called Standing Up.
Standing Up, and this is an example of the little backstory behind this. I was reading some science news, and that inspired this poem. And it's a short, non-rhyming poem. Okay, this is a free verse, but this is published in Nadwa Poetry and Translation. And Standing Up. When I was able to stand on my own 2 feet, which some say happened 7 million years ago when the stars exploded, flashed our atmosphere with lightning, and burned our trees, even the ones in the garden leaving grasses, I stood straight up on my haunches, not to avoid the lion or to carry something special like my food, or to express any prowess against my enemy or competing males, but rather to dance under the stars and hold your hand.
Wow. Standing Up. That's interesting to take all that science background, all of that, I mean, that's anthropology to the core, and yet put it in a different context and a totally different, I mean, that's kind of an interesting background, but it means much more than that.
Yeah, I'm trying to get your image back on here. I don't know what to do.
When it's able to stand on my own 2 feet, which some say happened when sometimes I look at the beginning of the lines and see patterns there: when, which, when, with. There's 4 lines in a row that start with those "w" sounds. You probably wouldn't even notice that, but it's there.
Yeah, I didn't notice it. I'm much more conscious on how the line ends than I am on how the line the word beginning the line. If I have to put a weak word anywhere, I would rather, and those are the 2 choices, I'd rather put it in the front of the line than at the end of the line, like ending a line on an article or a conjunction or a preposition. Though the latter, there are some cases where ending the line on the preposition can be effective, but generally I try to avoid that if I can.
Then we look at some of the words down the middle there. We have happened, exploded, burned, leaving grasses, garden leaving grasses, haunches, enemy, and then ending with dance and hold your hand.
Yeah, the idea of holding hands is a thesis or a recurrent theme in some of my work that on a poem before this one called "And Then It Rained," was looking at humankind in the beginning, and when sex was probably nothing more than just procreation, the realization of sensuality, when did that come into the picture? And I think, I would guess, I don't know, I'm just doing my poetic thinking, I would think that the first sensuousness would have been in holding hands or touching hands. And so I focus on that aspect. And so it's showing up here again that holding hands is so important. Just touching. It's I know that here in the present day and time now that such a thing is extremely sensuous to me personally. And so I just imagine this may be a way that intimacy may have evolved. I don't know.
Oh, and I thought you were talking about love and joy being greater than fear and the need to all the other evolutionary things they talk about.
Yeah.
Could be. Okay, let's go. Let's keep going. Did you have another one to pop up?
I have another one that I wanted to share, at least in part, just to demonstrate the idea of rhyme. Let me see if I can. This poem. Can you see that? Because my screen is messed up.
We're still seeing the previous standing up.
Okay, I got to do something. I got to get your image back.
Yeah,
then,
you're gonna have to exit full screen, I think. I don't know.
Let me see. I got you on little screen. Okay, new share. This will work. And this is the one. This piece was just accepted last week by Red Coyote Journal, and it's the title poem of my collection on Native American infused poetry.
Okay, let's hear it.
Not just redactions, but there are poems that have been influenced by Native American culture and legend and history. And this poem here is, the whole collection is called the Sacred Flute. So this is the poem about the flute, the legend of the flute, which comes from the Sioux, and the Siatanka is a flute only for love music to a Winchinchala, a girl to fall in love with. So what I've done is I've taken the legend, I've compressed it, I've introduced some rhyme, and I'll point it out now because that's the point of this poem, is to show you how I do the rhyme. It's in AAB, CD. Okay, so the first two lines of the tercet rhyme very softly, very slanted. Many generations ago, my people played drums, gourd rattles, and bull roarers, but no flutes. Night came deep inside of thick woods, with no moon, full of haunting hoots and the groaning of trees in the wind. Then a new sound, mournful, ghostly, sad, but beautiful. A young hunter mostly had a dream of a red-headed bird. And it goes on like that. Because the poem is a little long, so I don't want to take too much time reading it, but it gives the whole legend. And you can see by just looking down how my rhymes are, like man and then. See, that's a really slanted line.
Yeah.
And what's even more slanted is the next one, down and became. That's really stretching a rhyme. But some of them, like leaves and trees, at least it's assonantal rhyme. The vowels are rhyming, the E sound.
Sure.
But some of the rhymes in here are hard as well, like would and stood. So I'm not opposed to hard rhymes. It's just that I don't want to draw attention to the poem by having too many of them. And they have to sound natural. So the line doesn't, I don't stop at the end of the line. It continues to read often. most of these. So that if you're not looking at it, it'll hear like natural internal rhymes to you, and I like that. That's what I like. Anyway.
Well, I can see let's look at right where your cursor is there. I'm just grabbed a stanza out of, it says, he took the hollowed piece of wood back to his village and stood in a holy place to purify himself. So in the first line of that, I see took and wood. That's a linear rhyme there. It's not in rhyme, but took, wood. And then
I do that a lot.
You have place and purify are alliteration.
Correct.
Holy place to purify. And so part of the poetic beauty, I think, well, what I call it is wordplay. And that may be an insult to someone, but there's a sense that our words and our sounds, a poet, anyone could stand there and just say, well, let me tell you the history of this thing. But something about poetry, it's that wordplay that we hear the music in the words.
Yes.
Said in a way that makes it fascinating to our ears. Is there any more from this one you want to read? I bet we could look through it and find some examples of.
No, I got other work that I can share, that not necessarily rhyming work, but it'll have that. Sure. It'll have that internal sonics though. All my work will have the internal sonics, because that like you use the word, that's the same word that's on my website, the music of words, the art of poetry, the music of words. And so
how do you choose the length of your lines? Let's look at this.
All right.
They're all similar lengths. I'm not counting the syllables or the feet, but they're very similar. And what makes you then wants to break the end of the line there and go on to a new line?
Yeah, well, okay, that's a good question. And I'm not sure what particular line or verse this occurred in, but oftentimes somewhere in the early draft of my poem, there'll be a line break that grabs my attention. And so that when that happens, that often will set the line length for me. And of course you can't always make it work. So I have to do other creative things, like starting to use indented lines in order to achieve the uniformity that I'm looking for. But more than likely, it was that reason. That was one of the reasons that factored into the line length. The other thing is that when you tell a story, I think of the ballad form. This is not a ballad form at all. The ballad form are quatrains, 4 lines, with the second and fourth verses rhyming, but they're typically iambic, heptameter. Well, the first lines are iambic tetrameter. The next line's iambic hexameter, and then it goes back to iambic tetrameter, and then iambic. In other words, 8 or 6 syllables per line seems to be very convenient for storytelling, as opposed to, say, 10 syllables, though that can work too, but I wouldn't go beyond that. So just for giggles, how many syllables are on an average line here? Many generations ago, my people. All right, 11. Played drums, gourd rattles, and bull. So that's 7. The night came deep inside a thick woods. 8. With no moon, full of haunting hoots. 8. So I would guess that the average line length on the couplets are going to be about 8 syllables. The third lines often are shortened, and maybe that's just because of the way the rhythm seemed to work with the rhyme scheme that I chose. And I don't know. When I read out loud as I'm writing sometimes, and I don't wait until I'm deep into the revision process to check to see if I like the sound of it. It's kind of like it's that I allow that during my creation process as well as my revision process. I'm the sound is important to me. So I'm reading out loud as I'm typing or scribbling or whatever however the poem gets written first.
So if this was in prose, all these lines would just be strung across the page to the margins. But when we sing a song, like any modern song, we put it in verse because we repeat a short line, and often there is patterns to each line.
Yes.
And so poetry and music are very similar in that sense. I mean, they're
yes. So I guess one of the things you can take away from this part of the discussion is that you don't have to have meter and rhyme in order to have rhythm. The flow of the words can be very appealing, but yet not be legalistic or regimented, like a soldier's march. Like
okay.
the example that I give often is just imagine yourself at the beach, at the ocean beach, where you're watching the waves come in, and it's very soothing. But yet, if you look carefully, you'll see that they're not exactly regular. There is variation on the timing of the waves. So that's the way with when I write poetry, the metrical content of my work might accidentally be iambic, pentameter or something, because most of human speech is iambic anyway. But it's not contrived, or I don't deliberately try to maintain the same meter throughout the whole poem, but I will try to maintain a particular meter for a short section if I want to drive home a point, like that iambic, that anapestic tetrameter, da-da-doom, 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 can be used to what do you call it? In one of my poems, I use it to give the impression of power surging, like the horses. But in this particular instance, it was a space engine, and so I deliberately wrote anapestic tetrameter in that particular verse only to drive home that point. And what's so cool about the anapest is that it delves right nicely with the iamb, which is neutral. Da doom, da doom, da da doom, da doom, da doom, da da doom. You see how the iamb and the anapest can mix together so well. I don't think of these things when I'm writing. They just happen naturally. Only in my post-writing analysis on my work do I notice some of these things. Maybe in a later revision, I said, I can take advantage of that, and then I'll tweak it to fine-tune it like that. But in first draft, that may or may not be there. And
Okay.
yeah.
So I want to ask you let's talk about that more, about your process, maybe what starts as inspiration and then the technical part. Tell us about, I don't know if you want to use this poem as an example, but in general.
I'm sorry, I just closed it.
It's okay. I just want to talk to you for a minute now. This is great. So in general, what do you think of the concept of inspiration versus hard work? What's your process like?
It's all hard work, but I very much believe in inspiration too. And the truth of it is, and I don't know if I'm now. I guess I'm going to confessional time. Back in the early days, and this would be 2004, 2005, that neck of the woods. When I'd sit at my desk or the table, wherever I want to start writing. Okay, I'm in the right mood. I'm ready. I want to write a poem, and the pen's in my hand and poised literally on the paper, and my head's down, and I'm going, okay, Lord, anytime, I'm ready. I wanted to be struck by that inspiration. Well, I waited a long time. And to add, since I'm confessing things, I might as well confess one more. you're familiar with KB's open mic at the Barnes and Noble last
Yeah.
Friday. All right. Well, in the beginning, again, '05 for me, and this when I discovered it, and these list of words that are solicited from which we're to write a poem or whatever for the following month, I was not happy about it. I thought it was contrived. I thought it was artificial. I poo-pooed it, and I was vocal about it. But I tell you right now, I've already repented numerous times, because the truth of it is, almost every time I write a poem like that, it gets published after revision. So it's a very, very powerful tool to use to write something. This a list of words. And why? Because as you read the words or say them out loud, even the adjacent word, but not necessarily even adjacent, but there's a connection that's made to an event or an experience from which it's almost like an aha moment, and then all the other words will start just feeding into that particular concept. And so, as KB puts it, it's good for, instead of looking at a blank screen, a blank page rather, that you have these words to help trigger the creative process. So I used to be poo-pooer, but now that I'm matured as a poet, and long before I matured as a poet, I realized the value of all prompts. So my source of inspiration is all, and it's all God derived, I know, but something to connect to my past experience, whether it be a list of words or an abiding image as I'm driving down the road, or a piece of music or something, something all around us. All we have to do is observe and not have an agenda of, well, I hear there's a bird on the wire. Do I have to write a poem? That's got to be a poem in there. Well, maybe there is if you don't look too hard. If you just relax, those things will naturally happen.
Okay. So we've just got a couple minutes left. So let me finish by asking them, maybe you already answered it, about what tip would you give to aspiring or novice writers to help us maybe take that next step? Give us some tips about how to improve our poetry.
Yeah, don't beat yourself up. Number one, about writing it. A lot of the really good poems that we read that have been published or in compendiums or anthologies, whatever, those works they weren't born that way. They were when they were birthed, they may have been okay. They may have been even junk, not likely junk, but not publishable. But after some time, which may be weeks to years, in rare occasions is much sooner, then they get published. So when a novice looks at a published work, they see how good it is. They say, well, I can't write like that. No, most of us can't produce something like that from the get-go. You give it birth and then let your left brain kick in with all the skills of crafting the poem. So my advice is, don't beat yourself up. And then keep in mind the major elements. I've distilled it all down to 4 big, broad things. Of course, emotion, to drive emotion is a desired end product, but the ingredients for the poem: LIMS, LIMS is my acronym. L is for language, I is for image, which means all sensory images, M is for music, and S is for structure. And they all not only work, not only are they contributing elements, but what really makes a poem sing, so to speak, is when all these elements work together, you have a synergistic effect. And so just keep in mind about the interplay. Don't force words, and don't force a round word into a square box. Just and don't worry about creating a masterpiece from the beginning. That will come.
Sweet. All righty. Well, I think we're going to have to do this again. I want to cut us finish for night. And thank you, John, very much for your time. And I hope the guild members will take advantage of this interview. And I don't know how to end these. This is my first time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Take care. I'm going to end this right now.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
You bet. Bye.